love, and marriage. Just those three words, and your brain probably started humming the rest. Because for 11 seasons, that theme song was the opening bell for the most gloriously wrong family ever put on television. No life lessons. No heartfelt monologues. No hug at the end of the episode. Just a shoe salesman, his couch-based wife, 2 kids who would have been raised better by a vending machine, and the kind of neighborhood chaos that makes you feel genuinely okay about your own family. Married with Children didn't just entertain America. It rewired what a family sitcom was allowed to be. It took the blueprint that ABC and NBC had been following since the dawn of television. The warm living room, the teachable moment, the dad who somehow always knew best, and it set that blueprint on fire and then made jokes about the fire. Today, we're going back. 15 facts about the Bundy family that you probably forgot, probably never knew, or were too busy laughing to actually absorb the first time. We're talking casting disasters, real-world feuds, accidental fame, and a title that almost told you exactly what the show was before you even press play. This is Married with Children like you haven't thought about it in years. Let's get into it. Starting things off at number 15, the woman who tried to destroy the show and accidentally saved it. There is no better origin story in television than this one. Married with Children had been on the air for about 2 years when a Michigan housewife named Terry Ricolta sat down one evening, watched an episode called Her Cups Runneth Over, and decided that what she had just witnessed was the moral collapse of American broadcasting. She wasn't mildly offended. She was launching a campaign. Ricolta wrote letters. Lots of them. She contacted advertisers directly, organized other concerned viewers, gave interviews to anyone who would listen, and made it her personal mission to have the Bundy family removed from the airwaves permanently. A handful of advertisers blinked and pulled their spots. Fox shuffled the time slot. It looked, for just a moment, like the pressure might actually work. It did not work. What it did instead was something no marketing budget could have engineered. Every time Ricolta appeared on a news segment or got quoted in a newspaper talking about how offensive Married with Children was, a few thousand more people tuned in to see what all the fuss was about. Curiosity is the most powerful force in entertainment, and Ricolta had accidentally handed the show a national spotlight. According to Katie Segal, viewership roughly doubled during the height of the controversy. The Bundys went from a show people liked to a show people talked about at work, at school, and at dinner tables, which is ironic, since the Bundys themselves never once had a functional dinner. Fox didn't just survive the backlash. They thrived on it. The network that was already building its identity around being the alternative to polished mainstream television suddenly had proof that the strategy worked. America didn't want to be protected from the Bundys. America wanted more Bundys. The show later returned the favor in the most petty way possible. A season 9 episode featured a fictional sitcom based on the Bundy family that gets canceled because a woman in Michigan didn't like it. If you're going to get attacked by a housewife and then use it as a punchline 6 years later, you've won on every level. Ricolta later said she never intended to give the show more attention, that she just wanted it off the air. The road to making Al Bundy famous is apparently paved with very good intentions. Number 14. The original Bundy kids were completely different people. When you picture Kelly Bundy, you picture Christina Applegate. Blonde, casually devastating. Somehow both the smartest and least informed person in every room she walked into. And when you picture Bud, you picture David Faustino, small, scheming, perpetually overlooked, and absolutely convinced that none of that was his fault. Those were not the original choices. The unaired pilot for Married with Children featured a completely different set of kids. Tina Caspary played Kelly, and Hunter Carson played Bud. Neither of them made it past the pilot. According to the producers and Ed O'Neill himself, the chemistry simply wasn't there. The jokes weren't finding their footing. The energy between the parents and the kids felt misaligned, and something that is very hard to define and very obvious when it's missing. The cast just didn't feel like a family. Even a dysfunctional one. The swap to Applegate and Faustino fixed everything almost immediately. Applegate had this effortless ability to play someone who was confidently, cheerfully wrong about everything. And Faustino found the exact frequency of annoying younger sibling that made Bud feel real, without making him unwatchable. Together with O'Neill and Segal, The four of them locked into something that 11 seasons couldn't shake loose. The original pilot has surfaced in corners of the internet over the years, and it is exactly as strange as you'd expect. A snapshot of a show that hadn't found itself yet, starring kids who were about to be replaced by people who would go on to define a generation of television. Unless you've gone looking for it, those original Bundy kids remain a footnote, a version of history that almost happened but didn't. Number 13, Al's Polk High jersey was built from Ed O'Neill's actual life. Al Bundy's entire personality can be traced back to one Saturday afternoon in his late teens. 4 touchdowns, 1 game, Polk High. That was the peak, and everything after it, the marriage, the kids, the shoe store, the couch, was just a long, slow acknowledgement that nothing would ever feel that good again. What makes it richer is that Ed O'Neill actually understood what it felt like to have been a Real football player. Before he became America's most recognizable sitcom Burnout, O'Neill played high school football in Youngstown, Ohio, earned a scholarship to Ohio University, and was signed by the Pittsburgh Steelers. He got cut before the season started. But the Steelers, that's not a minor footnote. That's a legitimate athletic career that ended too soon. So when O'Neill played a man whose entire identity was anchored to a high school sports moment, he wasn't reaching for something foreign. He was drawing on a version of that feeling he actually knew. The difference being that AL's 4 touchdowns were fictional glory, while O'Neill's real career, as brief as it was, had more substance than anything Al ever did outside that one game. And then there's the other thing. In 2007, more than 15 years into dedicated training, O'Neill earned a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. The man best known for scratching himself on a couch and complaining about women's feet had quietly become someone who could neutralize a threat in under 30 seconds. He said in interviews that playing Al Bundy was simultaneously the best and worst thing that ever happened to him. The best because it made him a star. The worst because strangers still shout 4 touchdowns at him in public. He probably handles it better than Al would have. Number 12. Bud's rap career was painfully, genuinely real. David Faustino didn't just play a wannabe rapper on television. He actually tried to be one. In the early 90s, under the name Glil, Faustino released a full hip-hop album called Ballistics. Tracks were recorded, artwork was made, copies were pressed. The album did not go platinum. The album did not go gold. The album found its way to bargain bins at a velocity that suggested it had somewhere to be. But here is what deserves real credit. Faustino didn't stop there. He co-founded an actual nightclub on the Sunset Strip, also called Ballistics, which became a legitimate venue in LA's early 90s hip-hop scene. The music career never took off, but the hustle was real. This wasn't someone dabbling. This was someone who genuinely believed in what he was doing and went all in, even when the market responded with an extended silence. The on-screen version of this, Bud's delusional rap alter ego Grandmaster B, the backwards cap, the indoor sunglasses, the absolute refusal to accept that nobody was buying it, came directly from Faustino's actual experience. The writers didn't invent a fake rap career for Bud. They borrowed the real one and turned it into a joke that Faustino was, to his credit, completely game to play. The Ballistics album has picked up a cult following over the years among fans who appreciate the sheer committed weirdness of a whole episode. In a career full of strange choices, it might be the strangest, and somehow that makes it the most interesting. Number 11. Peg Bundy's hair was a full-time character in its own right. That red tower of hair that defied gravity, taste, and several laws of physics was not Katie Seagal's real hair. It was a wig, a custom, professionally maintained, aggressively voluminous wig that required its own level of dedication to sustain through 11 seasons. In the very early episodes, Seagal actually attempted to style her own hair for the role. Once the show became a hit and the character became iconic, the production upgraded to a purpose-built wig that could consistently deliver the look the audience expected. Think early 60s cocktail lounge energy filtered through the aesthetic sensibilities of someone who considered leopard print a neutral color. That was Peg's look, and it had to be exact every single time. The practical reason Seagal appreciated the wig was that it functioned as a costume in the truest sense. Slip it on, and you became Peg. Take it off and you were just Katie Sagal again, which mattered because she was simultaneously pursuing a music career and genuinely wasn't certain how long the show would last. The wig was protection. It kept the character and the person separate in a way that served both. Sagal has described Peg's entire look, the wig, the heels that never came off, the leggings, all of it, as essentially a drag performance. A fully committed, intensely crafted presentation of a character who was living at maximum volume in every possible way. The wig evolved slightly across the seasons, losing a little height, but never losing its identity, because you don't fundamentally change a look that's become a cultural landmark. You just maintain it and keep showing up. Number 10. The woman playing the laziest housewife on television was once a backup singer for some of the biggest names in music. Before Katie Sagal ever played a woman who treated the couch as her primary occupation, she had actual rock star credentials. Real ones. Sagal spent years as a professional backup singer, working with Bob Dylan, Etta James, Tanya Tucker, Olivia Newton-John, Gene Simmons, and Debbie Harry. She also performed with Bette Midler's Harlettes, which is about as far from Jeopardy Lane as it is possible to get. She wasn't just filling out a stage. She was a working musician with serious connections and genuine talent. After Married with Children made her famous, she continued releasing her own music, a solo album in 1994, another in 2004, and a covers record in 2013. The woman who spent 11 seasons pretending not to know where the kitchen was had built a parallel career in music that most professional musicians would genuinely envy. This is one of those facts that completely reframes the character when you go back and watch the show. Peg Bundy's defining quality was performative helplessness. She was brilliant at doing nothing. But the person underneath the wig was building something substantial on multiple fronts at the same time. The contrast is kind of remarkable. Number 9. There's a hidden movie car in the opening credits that you've probably never noticed. The next time you watch the opening credits for the first season of Married with Children, take a close look at the traffic footage. Specifically, look for the Wagon Queen family truckster, the famously hideous pea green station wagon from National Lampoon's Vacation. That aerial traffic footage used in the opening wasn't shot for the show. It was lifted directly from a 1983 vacation movie, and Clark Griswold's disaster vehicle cruises through it clear as day if you know what to look for. This means the Bundy family and the Griswold family technically exist in the same universe, which feels less like a coincidence and more like inevitability. Both families were middle class. Both were perpetually underprepared for the realities of their own lives, and both spent significant time in vehicles going places they probably shouldn't have gone. The primary difference is that the Griswolds were optimists who kept getting crushed. The Bundys had abandoned optimism so completely that getting crushed was just Tuesday. Swap Al and Clark for one episode and honestly, would either show survive the crossover intact? Probably not. But it would be absolutely worth watching. Number 8. Married with Children gave Fox its entire identity. When Fox launched in the mid-80s, it was a startup network with no track record, no reputation, and no obvious reason for anyone to care about it. The three major networks, ABC, NBC, and CBS, had decades of audience loyalty and institutional power. Fox had ambition and very little else. Married with Children changed that. When premiered in 1987 alongside The Tracy Ullman Show, it became Fox's first primetime sitcom, and it immediately declared what Fox was going to be. Not safe, not sanitized, not interested in competing with what already existed by doing the same thing. Fox was going to be the network that aired what the other networks wouldn't touch, and Al Bundy was going to lead the charge with one hand in his waistband. The ripple effects of that positioning cannot be overstated. Without Married with Children establishing Fox as the network willing to go places others wouldn't, it's genuinely unclear whether The Simpsons gets made in the same form, whether Family Guy finds a home there, whether the network develops the appetite for chaotic, boundary-pushing content that defined much of its most successful programming through the 90s and beyond. Al Bundy didn't just entertain viewers. He built a network. He gave Fox a personality at the exact moment it needed one. The shoe salesman from Jeopardy Lane accidentally became one of the most consequential figures in television history, which would have made him deeply uncomfortable if he'd been asked to think about it too hard. Quick question before we continue. Who was your favorite Bundy? The eternally defeated Al, the magnificently unbothered Peg, the cheerfully oblivious Kelly, or the perpetually overconfident Bud? Drop it in the comments. And if you're enjoying this, hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Now back to the Bundys. Number 7. The show ended without anyone bothering to tell the cast. 11 seasons, 259 episodes. An entire decade of the Bundy family existing in American living rooms week after week, building something that had genuine cultural weight. And when Fox decided to end it in 1997, they did not consider it particularly important to notify the people who had made it. Ed O'Neill was on vacation when the cancellation was announced. He found out from strangers. According to the story that has circulated for years, someone near him at breakfast mentioned it. And that was how the lead actor of an 11-season show learned it was over. Christina Applegate heard through friends. The cast found out the way the general public found out, through channels that had nothing to do with the network that employed them. The final episode to air, The Chicago Shoe Exchange, was not written as a finale. There is no closure, no callbacks to earlier seasons, no moment where the characters acknowledge what they've been through together. The Bundys simply did what they always did and then stopped, which, if you think about it, is probably the most accurate ending the show could have had. These were not people who processed things. These were not people who reflected on their experiences and grew. They were exactly who they were on episode 1. And they were going to be exactly that way until the last frame. And then they'd stop being on television. There's something weirdly correct about that. A show that spent 11 years refusing to give its characters growth or resolution, ending without growth or resolution. The Bundys didn't get a farewell. They just didn't show up anymore, which is honestly very on brand. Number 6. The Bundy house had an address that couldn't make up its mind. Jeopardy Lane. That much stayed consistent. For 11 seasons, the Bundy family lived on Jeopardy Lane. And if there's ever been a more appropriate street name for a family in perpetual low-grade crisis, television history has not produced it. The house number, however, was a different matter. The address fluctuated between 9764 and 9674 across various episodes, switching back and forth with a kind of casualness that suggests either nobody was tracking it or nobody thought anyone would notice. The street name never changed. The number simply could not commit. There are two possible explanations. One is that it was straightforward continuity error in a show that was written quickly, produced at volume, and not especially concerned with the kind of obsessive internal consistency that fans would later map out in detail. The other more entertaining explanation is that the Bundys were so financially unstable and domestically chaotic that they kept losing their exact address and had to approximate. Neither explanation is contradicted by anything in 11 seasons of the show. What is certain is that late 80s sitcom writing operated on a looser standard of internal logic than audiences now apply. The jokes had to land. The performances had to work. If the house number drifted 2 digits in either direction, that was tomorrow's problem. Al had bigger things to worry about. Specifically everything. Number 5. The show tried to launch a whole universe and mostly failed. Married with Children was successful enough that the people around it started wondering whether Bundy energy could be extracted and applied elsewhere. The experiment that came closest to working was Top of the Heap, a backdoor pilot that aired as an episode of Married with Children and then became its own short-lived series. It starred a pre-Friends Matt LeBlanc as Vinny Verducci, a young guy with ambitions his circumstances couldn't quite support, and Joseph Bologna as his scheming father Charlie. The show managed 6 episodes before disappearing. LeBlanc's involvement is the most interesting wrinkle. Top of the Heap didn't make him famous, but it gave him visibility in the right rooms at the right time, and within a few years, he was Joey Tribbiani. The show that failed became a stepping stone to one that absolutely didn't. The other spin-off attempts were less successful even than that. Vinny and Bobby, a follow-up vehicle for LeBlanc built around the same character with a different friend, managed to be even less memorable than Top of the Heap. and Radio Free Tiberius, a backdoor pilot featuring Bud Bundy in a college setting, never made it to series at all. What all of these experiments confirmed was something that probably shouldn't have been a surprise. The Bundy universe worked because of the specific combination of people who inhabited it. Al, Peg, Kelly, and Bud were not a formula that could be applied to other characters. The chemistry was the product, and the chemistry was not transferable. Number 4, someone in Britain looked at the show and thought, yes, we should do this. In 1996, British television produced Married for Life, a remake of Married with Children set in England with a British cast, British jokes, and the full structural blueprint of the original. Russ Abbott played Ted Butler, the Al Bundy of the operation. Susan Kidd played his wife. The Kelly and Bud equivalents were renamed Nikki and Lee. It ran for 7 episodes. Critics were not kind. The general consensus was that the show had the shape of Married with Children without the substance. The dysfunction was there, the setup was familiar, but the specific cruelty and timing and chemistry that made the original work simply wasn't. What read as savage in an American context landed as awkward in a British one, and what was supposed to feel like anarchic family television came across as something that wasn't quite sure of itself. The Bundy formula, it turned out, was not a universal solvent. It worked in one specific place, with one specific group of people, in one specific cultural moment. Transplanting the frame to another country with different comedic instincts produced something that satisfied nobody and confused the rest. 7 episodes later, British television sent the Bundys back across the Atlantic and quietly moved on. Number 3. The actor who plays Kramer almost played Al Bundy instead. Michael Richards is Cosmo Kramer so completely that it's nearly impossible to imagine him as anyone else. But before Seinfeld existed, Richards auditioned for Married with Children. He wanted to play Al Bundy. The audition, according to casting director Mark Hirschfeld, was unusual, offbeat in ways that didn't match the character or the tone the show was looking for. Richards brought something strange and physical and unpredictable to the room, and it wasn't what Al Bundy needed. Al Bundy needed exhausted and specific. He needed a man who had made peace with disappointment by pretending it hadn't happened. What Richards brought was something else entirely, and it didn't fit. Here is where the story takes its turn. Hirschfeld remembered that audition. When he was casting a new show a couple of years later, a show about a comedian and his friends in New York that needed a memorable neighbor, he thought of the strange, physical, unpredictable energy Richards had brought into the Married with Children room, and he cast him as Kramer. Michael Richards failed to get one role, and that failure led directly to a different role that made him one of the most recognizable comedic performers of his generation. The Married with Children audition that didn't work became the resume entry that got him something better. And Al Bundy remained exactly what he was always supposed to be, a role that only one person could play. Number 2. The feud between Al and Marcy wasn't just written into the scripts. On screen, Al Bundy and his neighbor Marcy, first Marcy Rhodes, then Marcy Darcy, were in a state of constant, mutual, cheerful hostility. Every interaction was a skirmish. Every conversation was a competition. It was great television precisely because it felt genuine. It may have been more genuine than intended. Ed O'Neill has acknowledged in various interviews over the years that he and Amanda Bearse, who played Marcy for most of the show's run, had real tension between them that didn't stay on screen. The specific reasons have never been laid out in full, but there were documented moments that didn't help. One of the more cited flashpoints was a TV Guide cover shoot in 1989. The cover featured the Bundy family. Bearse and David Garrison, who played her husband Steve Rhodes, were not included. O'Neill later said he regretted not speaking up for them at the time. Whether or not that regret came too late to repair anything is a separate question. Bearse, for her part, was asked about the relationship at a fan convention after the show ended and offered a response that told you everything while technically saying nothing. She cited the Thumper rule. If you don't have something nice to say, don't say anything at all. It is, as evasions go, a masterpiece of efficiency. Neither party has ever gone scorched earth publicly. But the polite distance between their accounts of the same decade suggests that the war between Al Bundy and Marcy Darcy had roots that went deeper than what was printed in the scripts. And finally, number 1, the show was almost called something that would have told you everything up front. During early development, the writers and producers were considering a title for their new show that was less a name and more a declaration of intent. The title they nearly went with was Not the Cosbys. In 1987, The Cosby Show was the dominant force in American television. It was funny, warm, aspirational, and deeply moral. The Huxtables solved problems through conversation, patience, and the application of good values to difficult situations. They hugged it out. They talked it through. They emerged from every conflict slightly wiser and more appreciative of each other. Not the Cosbys would have put a stake in the ground before a single episode aired. This is the other thing. This is the show for everyone who is tired of being told what a family is supposed to look like and feel like and want. This is what happens when you pull back the curtain and show what's actually going on. The exhaustion, the resentment, the low-grade financial dread, the deeply impractical love that keeps people in rooms together even when they'd be happier somewhere else. Fox ultimately decided the title was a little too direct, which is saying something given that this was the same network that had just built its identity on being too direct. They called it Married with Children instead, which sounds almost wholesome if you don't look too closely. But the spirit of Not the Cosbys never left the show. It was there in every episode, every joke, every moment where the Bundys refused to learn anything or grow or produce the kind of television that told you everything was going to be fine. Everything was not going to be fine. Al was going to be tired. Peg was going to be on the couch. Kelly was going to be confidently wrong about something. Bud was going to be overlooked. And all of it was going to be funnier than anything happening on a show where the family actually liked each other. Not the Cosbys might have been the most honest title in the history of American television. They changed it. But for 11 seasons, they made the show that name deserved. And that's 15 facts about the most dysfunctional family in TV history. And the show that changed what television was allowed to be. Which one surprised you most? Which one did we miss? Let us know below. And if this brought back memories of Jeopardy Lane, tap that subscribe button so you catch everything we put out next. See you in the next one.